It started subtly, so subtly that I almost convinced myself it was nothing. My name is Daniel, and for the past 8 years, my life has revolved around two things: work and family. Work demanded frequent travel, long hours away from home, but I always came back with gifts, stories, and promises to make up for lost time. Emily, my wife, used to light up when I walked through the door. Her smile could warm even the coldest corners of my heart after a grueling trip. But lately, something felt off. The first sign was small: a missed phone call here, an unanswered text there. At first, I chalked it up to her being busy or tired. After all, she worked hard too, managing our household while juggling her own career. But then came the silences, the moments during video calls where she looked distracted, her eyes darting towards something just out of frame. "Everything okay?" I'd ask, trying not to sound accusatory. And every time, she'd nod quickly, forcing a smile. "Of course," she'd say, "just thinking about dinner." But it wasn't dinner. I knew it deep down, though I tried desperately to ignore it. The second sign hit me harder. When I returned from a week-long conference in Chicago, I brought flowers, roses, her favorite. She thanked me politely, placed them on the counter, and went back to scrolling through her phone. No hug, no kiss, just indifference. It stung more than I cared to admit. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe I was reading too much into things because of how lonely those hotel rooms made me feel. Or maybe it was guilt gnawing at me, for leaving so often, for not being the husband I should have been. Still, doubt lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. One evening, as I sat alone in yet another sterile airport lounge waiting for my connecting flight, I found myself staring blankly at my wedding ring. Had I failed her somehow? Was this distance my fault? The questions swirled endlessly, each one heavier than the last. By the time I landed, exhaustion weighed on me, not just from the journey, but from the growing unease in my chest. When I finally walked through the front door, Emily greeted me with a tight smile. "Welcome home," she said softly, stepping aside to let me in. There was no warmth in her voice, no spark in her eyes. For the first time, I wondered if the woman standing before me was still the same person I had vowed to love forever. That night, as we lay side by side in bed, miles apart despite sharing the same space, I resolved to find answers. Whatever was happening, I needed to know the truth, even if it broke me. The days that followed were a blur of routine and unease. I tried to push my suspicions aside, focusing instead on the things that had always brought us closer: cooking dinner together, watching movies, taking evening walks. But no matter what I did, the distance between us remained. Emily seemed distant, preoccupied, as though her mind was constantly elsewhere. Her laughter, once so effortless, now felt forced. Even her touch, a brush of her hand against mine, felt mechanical, devoid of emotion. It wasn't until one particular morning that I stumbled upon something that couldn't be ignored. I had left early for a business trip, but a last-minute change in plans meant I was able to stay home for an extra day. When I returned unexpectedly, I found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with a look of intense concentration. She didn't hear me come in, and for a moment, I stood there unnoticed, watching her. Then it happened. A notification popped up on her screen, a message from someone named L. The preview read only a few words, but they were enough to send a chill down my spine. "Can't wait to see you tonight." My heart sank. My stomach twisted into knots. I wanted to believe it was innocent, an old friend, a colleague, anything. But the way Emily's fingers hovered over the screen before she quickly closed the app told me otherwise. She froze when she finally noticed me standing there, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. "Daniel," she exclaimed, her voice trembling slightly, "I thought you were gone." "I changed my flight," I said, my tone measured, though inside I was reeling. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering toward her phone. Yeah, everything's fine. Just work stuff." Work stuff. The lie hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept her explanation, but my mind was racing. Who was Elle? What did he mean by "see you tonight"? And why did Emily look so guilty? That night, I lay awake long after Emily had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and replaying the scene in my head. Every instinct screamed at me to confront her, to demand answers, but I held back. If I pushed too hard, she might clam up completely, or worse, lie again. No, I needed proof. I needed to know the truth beyond any shadow of doubt. The next morning, while Emily was out running errands, I made my decision. I went online and ordered a small, discreet security camera, one designed to blend seamlessly into the decor. It arrived 2 days later, disguised as a simple digital clock. I installed it in the living room, positioning it so it captured the couch and the front door. As I adjusted the angle, guilt gnawed at me. Was this invasion of privacy? Was I crossing a line I couldn't uncross? But then I remembered the look on Emily's face when she saw me standing there. The panic, the guilt, and my resolve hardened. Whatever was going on, I deserved to know. For the next week, I acted as though nothing had changed. I kissed Emily goodbye before each trip, smiled through our conversations, and pretended everything was normal. Inside, though, I was a storm of emotions. Anger, betrayal, fear, all swirling together in a toxic mix. Each time I left the house, I reminded myself why I was doing this. When I returned from my next trip, the camera's memory card was waiting for me. My hands shook as I inserted it into my laptop, bracing myself for whatever I might find. The footage began innocently enough. Emily tidying up, reading on the couch, watering the plants. Then, late one evening, the front door opened. A man walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with an air of familiarity, as if he belonged there. Emily greeted him with a smile, a real one, the kind I hadn't seen in months, and gestured for him to sit down. They talked, laughed, leaned close to each other in a way that made my blood run cold. I paused the video, my breath catching in my throat. This was it. This was the proof I'd been dreading. Betrayal stared back at me from the screen, undeniable and raw. But the worst part? It wasn't just the affair itself. It was the realization that Emily had let someone else into our home, into the life we had built together. That trust, once shattered, could never be repaired. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the frozen image on my laptop screen. Time seemed to stretch and warp, each second heavier than the last. My chest felt tight, like an invisible weight was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The man in the video wasn't just a stranger. He was a symbol of everything I had feared but refused to believe. He represented the cracks in our marriage, the distance that had grown between us, and the betrayal that now loomed over everything I held dear. When I finally managed to move, my hands trembled so badly I could barely close the laptop. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to unleash the storm of emotions raging inside me. But instead, I forced myself to stay calm, cold, calculating. This wasn't just about anger, it was about justice. The next morning, I acted as though nothing had changed. Emily greeted me with her usual polite indifference, asking how my trip had gone and if I was hungry. I nodded, smiled, played the part of the loving husband while my mind churned with plans. I couldn't confront her, not yet. Not until I knew every detail, every lie, every secret she had kept from me. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own home, watching and waiting. I noticed things I hadn't before. The way Emily's phone constantly buzzed with notifications, the faint smell of cologne that lingered in the air when she came home late, the subtle changes in her demeanor whenever she thought I wasn't looking. Each new discovery fueled the fire burning inside me, but I kept it hidden, burying it beneath layers of forced normalcy. Then came the night that sealed my resolve. I had stayed up late under the pretense of catching up on work emails, but in reality, I was monitoring the camera feed. Around midnight, the front door opened again. It was him, the same man from the video. This time, they didn't bother sitting on the couch. They embraced immediately, their laughter soft but unmistakable. Watching them together made my stomach churn with disgust. But what happened next stopped me cold. As they stood there talking, Emily handed him something, a small envelope. He took it, glanced inside, and nodded solemnly. Money? A letter? Whatever it was, the exchange felt deliberate, almost transactional. And then he leaned in closer, whispering something into her ear that made her laugh softly. That laugh, so carefree, so genuine, was like a knife twisting in my gut. It wasn't meant for me anymore. I turned off the monitor, unable to watch any longer. My fists clenched involuntarily, nails digging into my palms. How dare she? How dare he? They thought they were safe, shielded by lies and secrecy, but they had no idea what was coming. The plan formed slowly, piece by calculated piece. I wouldn't let this go unanswered, not after everything we had been through, not after all the promises we had made. Revenge wouldn't bring back what we'd lost, but it would ensure that neither of them forgot the pain they had caused. For the first time since discovering the truth, I allowed myself to cry. Silent tears streamed down my face as I stared out the window at the darkened street below. Somewhere out there, life went on as usual. People laughing, living, loving. But my world had shattered beyond recognition. And yet, amidst the heartbreak, a strange sense of clarity emerged. I knew what I had to do. Tomorrow, I would begin setting the stage. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, my mind sharp and focused despite the sleepless night. The weight of what I was about to do pressed heavily on me, but there was no turning back now. Every action I took from this point forward would be deliberate, calculated, and precise. If Emily thought she could betray me without consequence, she and her accomplice were about to learn just how wrong they were. I started by creating a fake itinerary for an upcoming business trip. It wasn't difficult. Over the years, I had become adept at crafting professional-looking documents. I printed out flight details, hotel reservations, and even a fabricated agenda for meetings that didn't exist. When Emily asked casually over breakfast if I'd be traveling soon, I slid the papers across the table with a sigh. "Looks like it," I said, keeping my tone light but weary. "Another week in Dallas. These trips are really starting to wear me down." She glanced at the itinerary briefly, her expression unreadable. "That's tough," she murmured, not meeting my eyes. "But you'll manage. You always do." Her indifference stung more than I expected, but I forced myself to nod and smile. "Yeah, I guess so. Anyway, I'll be gone most of next week, so don't wait up for me on Monday night." If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. Instead, she simply nodded and went back to sipping her coffee, seemingly unfazed by the news. That lack of concern only fueled my resolve further. She didn't care. Not about me, not about our marriage, not about the life we had built together. Later that day, I made another purchase online, a burner phone. It arrived within hours, packaged discreetly in plain brown wrapping. I activated it using prepaid credit and sent a single text message to Emily's number. "Hey, Em. Just confirming, we're still on for tonight, right?" It was risky, yes, but necessary. I needed to see how she would react, whether she would slip up or reveal something unintentionally. Sure enough, within minutes, my laptop pinged with a notification. The hidden camera in the living room showed Emily pulling out her phone, reading the message, and typing a quick reply. "Yes, same time. Don't be late." Her casualness infuriated me. She didn't even hesitate, didn't question who might be texting her. To her, this was routine, a secret rendezvous planned as easily as ordering takeout. Watching her type those words felt like salt being rubbed into an open wound. With the pieces falling into place, I turned my attention to the man, the mysterious L. Whoever he was, he clearly believed he was untouchable, sneaking into my home and stealing what wasn't his. But he underestimated one thing: my determination. Using the information gleaned from the camera footage, I began piecing together his identity. He drove a black sedan, which I noticed parked outside our house during his visits. A quick search of local license plates revealed his name, Lucas Harper, a real estate agent, according to his LinkedIn profile. Handsome, successful, and apparently unbothered by the sanctity of marriage vows. Armed with this knowledge, I dug deeper, uncovering bits and pieces of his life. His social media profiles painted a picture of someone who thrived on charm and charisma, someone who likely saw himself as irresistible. Photos of him at networking events, smiling confidently beside clients, only added fuel to the fire burning inside me. By the end of the day, I had everything I needed: proof of their affair, a timeline of their meetings, and a clear understanding of who they both were. All that remained was execution. That evening, as Emily prepared dinner, I sat quietly at the kitchen counter, pretending to review work documents. In reality, I was drafting a letter, a carefully worded message designed to shatter her carefully constructed facade. "Dear Emily," I began, my handwriting steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. "You may think you've been clever, hiding your secrets behind closed doors. But trust me when I say, I know everything." I paused, rereading the words to ensure they conveyed the right mix of anger and control. Satisfied, I continued writing, outlining every detail I had uncovered. The texts, the late-night visits, the envelope exchange. By the time I signed my name at the bottom, my hand ached from gripping the pen so tightly. When Emily finally retired to bed that night, I slipped the letter into her purse, knowing she would find it in the morning. Then, I set the stage for the final act. As I lay awake in the darkness, listening to her steady breathing beside me, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Was this who I wanted to become? A man driven by vengeance, consumed by betrayal? But then I remembered the laughter I had seen on the camera feed. The kind of joy she hadn't shared with me in months, and any lingering doubt evaporated. Tomorrow, the truth would come crashing down around them. And when it did, neither of them would emerge unscathed. The morning arrived with an eerie calm, the kind that precedes a storm. I woke up early, before Emily stirred, and watched her as she groggily reached for her purse to grab her phone. She froze when her fingers brushed against the folded letter tucked inside. For a brief moment, confusion flickered across her face, but it quickly gave way to panic as she unfolded the paper and began to read. Her hands trembled slightly, and her breath hitched. She glanced toward me, lying still in bed with my eyes closed, pretending to sleep. I could feel her gaze on me, searching for some sign that I was awake, that I knew. But I remained motionless, letting her stew in the uncertainty of whether I had truly discovered everything, or if this was just a cruel coincidence. After what felt like an eternity, she quietly slipped out of the room, taking the letter with her. From my hidden camera feed, I later saw her pacing in the living room, rereading the words over and over again. Her expression shifted from shock to fear to anger, her emotions raw and unguarded. It was the first time in months that I had seen her genuinely affected by anything. Satisfied that the seed of doubt had been planted, I got ready for the day as though nothing unusual had happened. Over breakfast, I kept my tone light and conversational, asking about her plans for the week. She answered mechanically, her responses clipped and distracted. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning concern. "Fine," she replied quickly, avoiding my gaze. "Just tired." I nodded sympathetically, though inside, satisfaction coursed through me. The cracks were beginning to show. Later that afternoon, I made one final preparation. Using the burner phone, I sent another text to Lucas, this time, posing as Emily. "Change of plans. Come tonight instead. My husband will be gone. We can talk." He responded almost immediately. "Sure thing. Same place." "Yes. Be careful, though. He's suspicious lately." The reply came back swift and confident. "Don't worry. I'll handle it." His arrogance only fueled my resolve. He thought he was in control, that he could manipulate the situation without consequence. Little did he know, he was walking straight into a trap. As evening approached, I packed a small bag as if preparing for my fake business trip. Before leaving, I kissed Emily goodbye, a gesture so mundane it barely registered with her, and headed out the door. Instead of driving to the airport, however, I parked a few blocks away and waited. From my vantage point, I watched as Lucas arrived right on schedule, parking his black sedan down the street. He walked casually to the front door, knocking twice before letting himself in, as if he owned the place. Through the camera feed, I observed their interaction. They greeted each other warmly, exchanging smiles and quiet laughter. Then, something unexpected happened. Lucas pulled out the envelope Emily had given him days earlier and handed it back to her. "I think we need to talk about this," he said, his voice low but serious. She hesitated, glancing at the envelope as though it contained something dangerous. "What's wrong?" There's more to this than you realize, he continued cryptically. And if your husband finds out? My blood ran cold. What exactly had they been hiding? Was this affair more than just infidelity? Had they been planning something bigger? Something that involved me? Before I could process these thoughts further, I noticed movement outside. A car slowed down near Lucas's sedan, its headlights briefly illuminating the vehicle. The driver stared intently at the house before driving off. Something about the scene felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Back inside, Emily opened the envelope and gasped softly. Whatever was inside clearly startled her. Lucas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, whispering something I couldn't hear through the camera's microphone. That's when it hit me. They weren't just having an affair. There was something else going on here, something far darker and more complicated than I had anticipated. Anger surged within me, but it was tempered by curiosity. If they thought they could play games with me, they were sorely mistaken. Tonight, I would confront them, not as the betrayed husband, but as someone who demanded answers. Grabbing a flashlight and steeling myself for what lay ahead, I stepped out of my car and headed back toward the house. It was time to end this charade once and for all. The air was thick with tension as I approached the house, my footsteps muffled by the soft grass beneath me. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing like a drum roll leading up to the inevitable clash. I paused at the front door, taking a deep breath to steady myself. This wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how painful or complicated it might be. I didn't knock. Instead, I used my key, slipping inside silently. The living room was dimly lit, the faint glow of a table lamp casting long shadows across the walls. Emily and Lucas were seated on the couch, their heads bent over the contents of the envelope. They hadn't heard me come in. For a moment, I simply stood there, watching them. Their body language spoke volumes. Emily's shoulders were tense, her hands trembling as she held whatever document they had been discussing. Lucas leaned closer to her, his expression grim but determined. Whatever they were dealing with, it was serious enough to make even him look uneasy. Interesting, I said finally, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. They both froze, their heads snapping up in unison. Emily's eyes widened in shock, while Lucas's face paled visibly. Neither of them moved for a moment, as though hoping this was some kind of nightmare they could wake up from. Daniel, Emily stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same question, I replied coldly, stepping further into the room. Or maybe I should ask him. Lucas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He raised his hands defensively, as if trying to defuse the situation. Look, man, this isn't what it looks like. Oh, really? I interrupted, my tone sharp and biting. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been sneaking around behind my back with my wife. Care to explain that? It's not just an affair, Emily blurted out suddenly, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. She looked at me pleadingly, tears welling up in her eyes. There's more to it than that. That admission caught me off guard. I had suspected something deeper was going on, but hearing her confirm it sent a fresh wave of confusion and betrayal crashing over me. What do you mean, more? I demanded, my gaze shifting between them. What exactly have you two been hiding? Lucas hesitated, glancing at Emily before turning back to me. It's complicated, he began cautiously. But the short version is, we weren't trying to hurt you. We were trying to protect you. Protect me? I repeated incredulously, my voice rising. By sleeping together? By lying to me? That's your idea of protection? No, Emily exclaimed, standing now as well. Her hands gripped the edge of the coffee table, knuckles white. It's not like that. It's about the business, the company you work for. Something's wrong, Daniel. Really wrong. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. The company I worked for? What did that have to do with any of this? Explain, I said tersely, crossing my arms over my chest. Lucas sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. I'm a real estate agent, sure, but I also do side work. Investigative stuff. A mutual friend hired me to look into your employer. There are rumors, serious ones, about illegal activities happening within the company. fraud, money laundering, even ties to organized crime. My stomach churned. The company I had devoted years of my life to was involved in criminal activity? It sounded absurd, impossible. And yet, the fear in their eyes told me they believed every word. When I started digging, Lucas continued, I realized the trail led directly to you. Or at least, to information you might have access to. Financial records, emails, confidential documents. Someone high up doesn't want those things getting out. And you thought seducing my wife was the best way to get them? I snapped, my anger flaring again. No. Emily cried, stepping toward me. That's not how it happened. I met him because he reached out to me. He said he needed help understanding what was going on. At first, I didn't believe him, but then strange things started happening. Calls at odd hours, people following me, even break-ins at the house when you were away. I thought you were in danger, Daniel. I thought if I worked with him, we could figure out what was going on and keep you safe. Her explanation left me reeling. Was it possible? Could all of this, the secrecy, the lies, the affair, have been motivated by fear rather than malice? Before I could respond, the sound of tires screeching outside shattered the fragile calm. We all turned toward the window just in time to see headlights sweep across the room as a car sped away. They're on to us, Lucas muttered darkly, pulling out his phone. We need to move. Now. Move where? I demanded, still grappling with everything I had just learned. What's happening? There's no time to explain, Lucas shot back, already heading for the door. If they find us here, none of us are safe. Emily grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Please, Daniel, trust me. Just this once. We don't have a choice. Trust her? After everything? The irony wasn't lost on me, but the urgency in her voice and the fear in her eyes was undeniable. Reluctantly, I nodded, grabbing my coat and following them out the door. We piled into Lucas's sedan, speeding off into the night. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional chirp of crickets. No one spoke. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. After several tense minutes, Lucas pulled into the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. He killed the engine and turned to face us, his expression grim. This place is secure for now, he said, but we can't stay long. Whoever's after us will track us down eventually. Who exactly is US? I asked sharply. And who's after us? Lucas hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his seat. Your company has ties to a powerful syndicate. They operate in the shadows, using legitimate businesses as fronts for their operations. When I started poking around, they noticed. And now, he trailed off, shaking his head, now they think you're working against them, Emily finished softly, which means anyone close to you is in danger too. The implications sank in slowly, each one heavier than the last. If what they were saying was true, then my life, as I knew it, was over. My career, my home, everything I had built was tainted by corruption I hadn't even known existed. But why involve you? I asked, turning to Emily. Why drag you into this mess? Because I care about you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Because I couldn't sit back and do nothing while you walked blindly into danger. I made mistakes, I know that, but everything I did because I love you. Her confession struck a chord deep within me. For so long, I had believed she had stopped caring, that our marriage was beyond saving. But now, faced with the possibility that her actions, however misguided, had been driven by love, I felt a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. We need a plan, Lucas interjected, breaking the momentary silence. Running won't solve anything. We need proof, something concrete to expose what's really going on. And how do you suggest we get that? I asked bitterly. Walk into corporate headquarters and demand answers? Actually, Lucas hesitated, then pulled out a flash drive from his pocket. This contains some of the data I've gathered so far. It's incomplete, but it's a start. If we can get more emails, financial statements, anything, we might stand a chance. I stared at the tiny device, my mind racing. This was insane, dangerous, possibly suicidal. And yet, It was also the only option we had. Fine, I said finally, my voice firm despite the turmoil inside me. Let's do it. The three of us huddled in the dim light of the warehouse, poring over the flash drive's contents. Documents, spreadsheets, and encrypted files filled the screen, painting a chilling picture of corruption and deceit. Names, dates, transactions, all meticulously recorded, all damning evidence of the syndicate's reach. This is bigger than I thought, I murmured, scrolling through the files. If we release this, heads will roll. Exactly, Lucas replied, which is why we need to be smart about it. Leak it piece by piece, build public pressure until they have no choice but to shut down. But how do we get the rest of the information? Emily asked, her brow furrowed in concern. You said it yourself, it's incomplete. Lucas glanced at me, his expression unreadable. That's where you come in, Daniel. You still have access to the company's servers, right? If we can get you inside, you can retrieve the missing pieces. The suggestion sent a jolt of panic through me. Breaking into my own workplace to steal sensitive data? It sounded like something out of a spy movie, not real life. And if I get caught? I countered, my voice tinged with unease. You won't, Lucas assured me. Not if we time it right. Tomorrow morning, there's a major board meeting scheduled. Everyone will be distracted. You'll have a small window to slip in, grab what we need, and get out without anyone noticing. It was risky, reckless, even. But what other choice did we have? Sitting idly by wasn't an option, not when lives were at stake. All right, I agreed reluctantly. But we'll need a backup plan. In case something goes wrong. Lucas nodded. Already taken care of. I've arranged for a safe house outside the city. If things go south, meet us there. No questions asked. With the plan set, we spent the remainder of the night preparing. Lucas provided me with a burner laptop preloaded with hacking tools, while Emily helped me memorize the layout of the office building. By the time dawn broke, I felt as ready as I ever would be. As I prepared to leave, Emily pulled me aside, her eyes filled with worry. Be careful, she pleaded. Please. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you. Her sincerity caught me off guard. Despite everything, she still cared. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us after all. I'll be fine, I promised, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. We'll get through this together. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, my nerves stretched taut like piano strings. The building buzzed with activity as employees filed in for the day, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. I kept my head down, blending in seamlessly as I made my way to my desk. The board meeting was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m., leaving me a narrow window to act. As the clock ticked closer to the hour, I slipped away from my workstation and headed toward the server room. My heart raced with every step, each creak of the floorboards sounding deafeningly loud in my ears. Reaching the door, I swiped my ID card and entered, locking it behind me. Inside, rows of humming servers lined the walls, their blinking lights casting an eerie glow. I connected the burner laptop to the main terminal and began downloading the files we needed. Minutes passed like hours, each second stretching endlessly as I waited for the transfer to complete. Just as the progress bar neared 100%, a sudden noise outside the door made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Approaching fast. I quickly ejected the laptop and stuffed it into my bag, my pulse hammering in my ears. The door handle rattled, and I braced myself for discovery. But instead, the footsteps faded, moving past the room. Breathing a sigh of relief, I slipped out unnoticed and returned to my desk just as the board meeting concluded. No alarms, no suspicions. We had done it. Back at the warehouse, we uploaded the new files to a secure server and released them to the press. Within hours, the story exploded, sending shockwaves through the corporate world. Arrests were made, investigations launched, and the syndicate's empire began to crumble. In the aftermath, Emily and I sat together in silence, reflecting on everything we had endured. Trust wouldn't come easily, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. I'm sorry, she whispered, breaking the quiet. So am I replied. But maybe we can start over. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'd like that. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed it was possible.